Have you ever sat alone in a cold kitchen listening to the ticking of the clock and watching your tea grow cold only to realize no one calls you mom or grandma anymore, not because you did anything wrong, just because you have been with them for so long, long enough to become part of the background, a familiar chair that people forget needs to be saved. I am Lauren Smith, 68 years old. This year, for the first time in my life, I was not invited to Christmas, and that very moment changed everything. If you are also waiting for a call that never comes, an invitation that never rings, stay with me. I will tell you about the winter when I learned the most painful lesson to save a seat for myself before it is too late. My name is Lauren Smith. I am 68 years old. I live alone in a small house in Evergreen Hollow, a tiny town tucked between the hills of Vermont where the snow falls so heavily that it seems to cover even memories. If you are sitting in a dark kitchen right now, hearing only the steady ticking of the wall clock and a teapot long gone cold, then perhaps we are closer than you think. I used to be grandma, the woman everyone in the family could count on to appear on time for every holiday. I remembered every birthday, whether it was Liam's 5th or Ethan's 40th. I baked gingerbread cookies every Christmas. I wrapped gifts carefully with sparkling foil-tied red ribbons, and I was always the first to arrive at my son's house to help set the table, hang the lights, filling the home with the smell of cinnamon and fresh pine. That was our tradition, or at least that is what I thought. But this year, for the first time in more than 4 decades, I was not invited to Christmas. Not because I did anything wrong. No arguments, no big misunderstandings. Simply, I had been there too long. Long enough that I became part of the wall, part of a familiar chair no one noticed anymore. They still lived well, still laughed, still posted pictures on social media, but the seat for me at the table was gone, silently removed. I do not tell this story to complain or to seek pity. I tell it because I know that somewhere out there, perhaps right in the room where you are sitting, there are people quietly waiting for a call that will never come. A belated birthday message. A last-minute invitation. An empty chair at the Christmas table next to a plate of cold cookies. And a grandmother who once believed, if I am good enough, selfless enough, quiet enough, they will always need me. If that is you, sitting there with a cold cup of coffee in your hands, staring out at the snow-covered window, wondering, do I still matter if no one needs me anymore? Then please stay with me a little while longer. Do not turn away. Let me tell you about this winter, about the icy roads I walked, and about how I learned one of the simplest yet hardest lessons in life, to save a seat for myself. Not the seat at someone else's table, not the seat someone gives you when they need you, but a seat I choose, a seat I keep, a seat I protect, because I deserve it. And perhaps, after hearing my story, you will find your own seat too. Let us begin on a freezing Sunday morning when everything changed with just a single calm sentence spoken amidst the grinding of coffee beans and the smell of baked goods at the familiar Maple and Hearth Cafe in our town. That Sunday morning, the air was so cold that my breath turned into tiny, white clouds right in front of me. I was still driving my old Kia to Maple and Hearth Cafe, the little coffee shop on the corner of Evergreen Hollow's main street, which had been my regular seat every weekend for years. The cafe was decorated in full New England Christmas style, dried wreaths hanging on the red brick walls, tiny golden lights twinkling weakly, more for show than warmth, and the scent of cinnamon baking mixed with freshly ground coffee filling. The space. Everything was exactly as it had always been, except me. I seemed redundant. I pushed open the door. A small bell jingled gently. Riley, the 22-year-old waitress with a deep dimple on her left cheek, looked up from the counter immediately. "Good morning, Mrs. Smith. The usual cappuccino and strawberry muffin," she asked, without waiting for me to answer, already starting to prepare my order. Riley always remembered, not because I was special, but because she was the only one who still saw me as a real person, not part of the family background. "Thank you, dear," I said softly, as I always did. I chose my familiar spot by the window where I could see the town's Christmas tree, still with only 2 faded silver ribbons and an old metal star hanging loosely. I sat down, opened the small book on the table, pretending to read to hide my waiting, and then they arrived. Ethan walked in first, his steps a little slow, as if he were not fully awake from Saturday night. Brooke followed straight-backed, wearing a beige turtleneck sweater, holding the menu I knew she would not read at all. They sat down across from me. No greetings. No, how are you, Mom, or did you have breakfast? Only the faint scrape of chairs and Ethan's quiet sigh. Brooke did not wait for coffee to be served. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice calm like she was reporting the weather. We've talked it over, Mom. You won't be coming for Christmas this year. The words landed on the table like a cold stone. I did not flinch. I only nodded, slowly, as if I had been saying this to myself for a long time. Brooke continued, her voice steady, like reading a to-do list. Sophie is at the age where she needs more personal space. She wants things simple. Just us and the kids. Liam is still little. He will not notice the difference. We thought this year we would try something lighter, not too crowded. Ethan said nothing. He only glanced at me briefly, then looked down at the coffee Riley had just placed. No defense, no explanation. Not a word of Mom, I'm sorry. Only silence. The kind of silence I had grown accustomed to over the years, but this time it pressed down so heavily that I felt my chest tighten. I nodded again. Not in agreement. Just to end the conversation. My strawberry muffin remained untouched, still warm next to my cappuccino, half drunk. No one touched it. No one asked if I wanted more sugar. No one looked at me for more than 3 seconds. I stood up. My hand shook slightly as I took out my wallet, but I placed the exact change on the table. Every cent, like a retired accountant would. I think I will pay for myself, I said quietly, my voice oddly calm. Riley returned just then, carrying a small tray of homemade gingerbread cookies. Homemade, Mrs. Smith. I made them for you to take home, she said, her smile as bright as always. I looked at her. This time I did not nod. Thank you, dear, but I do not need them today. I walked out of the cafe. No one stopped me. No one reached out. No awkward glance. No hurried apology. The cafe door closed behind me with its familiar jingle. Outside, the cold wind cut like knives and fine snow began to fall. I paused for a moment, then continued walking. And then I heard, through the slightly ajar door, Brooke whispering to Ethan loud enough for me to hear, "She's been too much lately." The words were like a thin blade, not painful at first, but enough to make my blood freeze for a few seconds. Too much, too present, always there, too ready, too loving. I did not turn back. I did not push the door to ask again. I just kept walking slowly on the salted sidewalk where patches of gray ice shimmered like unhealed wounds. Every step whispered in my mind, this is not the end. This is only the beginning. And in that moment, as I stood by my car, hand on the freezing keys, a thought came clearly as if someone whispered right into my ear. No one remembers that I built the very first home they ever called home. I opened the car door, sat down, but did not start the engine immediately. I just sat there watching the snow fall across the windshield, and for the first time in my life I asked myself, is it time to build a new home? Not from bricks and stone, but from my own dignity. Then I started the car. The headlights swept across the snow-covered road. I drove away without looking back. Because this time I was no longer waiting for an invitation. I was the one opening the door for myself. I drove away from Maple and Hearth Cafe, but only a few hundred meters down the road I stopped. Not because the road was slippery, but because my legs suddenly felt unbearably heavy, as if they no longer wanted to carry me any farther. I turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and began walking along the salted sidewalk, where patches of gray ice still glimmered faintly under the dim streetlights. The cold wind cut through my thin wool coat, but I did not feel cold. I only felt emptiness. A vast, deep void that nothing could fill. Each step on the frozen pavement brought back old memories vivid enough to hurt. I remembered 12 years ago when Sophie was in kindergarten. Every Wednesday and Friday I drove to Little Acorn's school, parked among the bright red maple leaves, and waited under the trees. Sophie would run out, her golden hair tangled, hugging my legs and shouting, "Grandma! Grandma!" I would pick her up, kiss her rosy cheeks, and take her to Brooke and Ethan's house. Brooke would often stand at the door, smiling tiredly, saying, "Thank you for coming early, Mom. You are the one who keeps our family traditions alive." At that time, I thought I was indispensable. I thought those words of thanks were sincere. But now, walking through the familiar streets, I realized that gratitude had slowly disappeared. It had been replaced by silence. And that silence had accumulated over the years through every quiet act I had done without being asked. I remembered the year Ethan lost his construction job. The company went bankrupt and he sat dazed in the garage for 3 weeks. I did not ask him anything. I quietly called the bank and transferred $5,000 from my savings into his account. No sender name, no accompanying message, just a routine bank transaction. After that, Sophie had new shoes for school, and Ethan no longer had to deliver packages late at night. No one ever mentioned that money. Not a single "thank you, Mom." But I did not need it. I thought that was what a mother does. Then when Liam was born, Brooke stayed in the hospital for 3 days before calling me. Her voice sounded exhausted over the phone. "Mom, could you cook something for us? I am completely drained." I made her favorite apple oatmeal, the one she loved even while pregnant, and drove to their house every night. I left the food in the refrigerator on the porch, never stepping inside. They said they needed space. I nodded. I always nodded. And I kept doing it because I believed that if I did not take up space, if I did not demand anything, they would always need me in their own way. Every Christmas, I started preparing in early December. I wrapped gifts carefully. Soft wool scarves for Sophie because she liked huggable presents. A police Lego set for Liam because he loved patrol cars, and a dark-colored scarf with a Home Depot gift card for Ethan, things he always needed but rarely bought for himself. I wrapped them in shiny foil, tied red ribbons, and left them in a gift box in the attic. No one ever said, "Mom, will you come this year?" No one asked, "Do you want to bring something for dinner?" But I did it anyway, because I believed I had to be present. Because I thought love meant quiet presence, giving without expecting anything in return. But as I stood there in the snow-covered street, the cold wind whistling past my ears, I realized a truth colder than a Vermont winter. I had always been the easiest one in their eyes. Easy enough that they did not need to consider me anymore. No need to invite, no need to ask, no need to thank. Because I would come on my own. Because I would bring everything myself. Because I would disappear when I was no longer needed. I stopped at the edge of the road, my hands gripping the car keys, until my knuckles turned white. And in my mind, a thought rang out clearly as if someone whispered right next to me. No one remembers that I built the very first home they ever called home. That house, the little pine home my husband had built stone by stone, where Ethan first learned to walk, where Sophie first said "Grandma," where Brooke once cried in fear before giving birth, had now become their home. And me, I was just a passerby, a visitor, the one who brought gifts and left. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but not from pain. They fell from a deep, quiet sorrow, the sorrow of someone who had given so much that she had forgotten what was left for herself. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, took a deep breath of the freezing air, and kept walking. Not to go back home, not to wait, but to begin finding myself again. Because this time I no longer wanted to be the easy one. I wanted to be Lauren Smith, a woman worthy of her own seat, even if it was just an old wooden chair in a cabin by the lake where no one could tell me to leave. I drove home in silence. No radio, no open windows. Only the sound of tires rolling over thin snow and the rapid beating of my heart in my chest. When I stepped into my small apartment, the wooden floor creaked underfoot, a familiar greeting, but I did not turn on the lights. I simply sat down at the dining table, now also my work desk, and stared at last year's Christmas gift box still sitting on the shelf. It was still wrapped in shiny foil, still tied with a red ribbon never opened. And this time I knew it would never be opened. I turned on my computer and logged into my bank account. My fingers moved across the keyboard mechanically, like the habit of a retired accountant of 35 years. I printed every statement from the past 4 years. Sheets of black and white paper fell onto the table one by one like fragments of my life. I spread them out, organizing by year, by month, by transaction. And then the numbers appeared clear, cold, undeniable, over $278,000. Not the money I earned, but the money I had quietly transferred. $200 every month for the internet for 4 years. Because Brooke once said, "Mom, keep the account in your name so it does not get cut." $1,450 to fix the flooded basement for Ethan. $6,200 for a car deposit for Brooke. $1,800 for Sophie's summer classes. $3,200 for emergency hospital bills when Liam had a high fever 2 winters ago, and dozens of smaller transactions, meals, toys, utility bills secretly paid. I never asked for it back, never mentioned it, because I thought that was what a grandmother does. But then I saw it. A transaction that made my heart skip a beat, $3,800 from my credit card used by Ethan 8 months ago. No message, no call, just an unexplained charge. I checked it 3 times. It was the card I had lent Ethan for emergencies, with clear authorization only use when necessary and always notify me first. He had violated that trust, not because of the amount, but because of the silence. That silence now felt like a cut deeper than the words, "She's been too much lately," that I had overheard this morning. I sat there staring at the numbers on the screen, and for the first time in my life, I almost cried, not out of anger, but because I realized I had given so much that I had become an insignificant expense in someone else's ledger. Tears welled up, but I swallowed them back. I did not cry. I just took a deep breath and picked up my phone. I called Robert Hayes, the lawyer I had trusted for 20 years. His voice was still calm and deep, the kind typical of New England, few words but certain. "Lauren, I can tell something is wrong from your voice." "Go ahead." I spoke briefly. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Only one thing, I will prepare the documents immediately. You want to stop all recurring transfers, and we need to review the will. The cabin by Lake Evergreen is your personal property under Vermont law. Your husband left it entirely in your name. No one can contest it. I will add clear protective clauses. No one can ask you to transfer or sell it without your written consent." I nodded, though he could not see. "Thank you, Robert." As quickly as possible. That afternoon, I met Margaret Klein, an old friend from our accounting days at a small company in Burlington. We sat at Maple Bean, the small cafe, still with its round steel tables and the smell of toasted bread on both sides. Margaret's hair was whiter, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She looked at me without asking much and pushed a cup of peppermint tea toward me. "I hear you are reviewing your will," Margaret said softly. I nodded. "I need to redefine what my share really means," Margaret smiled sadly. "They did not invite you because they think you are not worthy. They did not invite you because they assume you will always show up anyway. Like an old chair, familiar enough that no one thinks to save a seat." I let out a short laugh, but it stuck in my throat. Margaret leaned forward. "Now is the time to rewrite your own ledger, Lauren. Not theirs. Yours." Her words were like a wake-up call. I went home, opened my computer, and created a new savings account. Account name for Lauren only. I transferred $12,000 into it, money I had saved from my pension and small investments. No one's permission, no notice, just me and the bank screen. When I pressed confirm, my hands did not shake. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Not power, but the right to make decisions about my own life. I printed the documents Robert sent by email and signed them with a firm hand. Each signature was a declaration: I am no longer the easy one. I am no longer an anonymous expense. I am Lauren Smith, a 68-year-old retired accountant, the legal owner of a cabin by the lake, and from now on the owner of my own dignity. I closed the folder and looked out the foggy window. The snow still fell gently but persistently, and in that moment I knew this winter would be unlike any other before, because this time I was not waiting for anyone to save a seat for me. I was saving a seat for myself. I did not drive straight home after signing the papers with Robert. I drove around town for a while, past the main streets lit with Christmas lights, past the old flower shop, where I had bought tulips every spring, past the post office where the town Christmas tree still stood silent and alone. The snow fell thicker, now covering the windshield in white. I turned on the wipers, but not the radio. I only wanted to hear the sound of tires rolling over snow, the only witness to my decision at that moment. I left no goodbye note. No scrap of paper on the kitchen counter, no messages to Ethan or Brooke. I only took the cabin key, the old brass key my husband had engraved with our names on the back, and drove straight out of town. The road to Lake Evergreen normally took 20 minutes, but that day I drove slower than ever, as if even the old Kia was trying to hold on to the final moments of an old Lauren Smith who had always waited for an invitation. When I turned onto the path leading to the cabin, the snow had already covered the way. Headlights swept across towering pine trees, long shadows stretching over the road. I stopped the car in front of the wooden porch and turned off the engine. Silence settled over everything. Only the gentle rustle of wind through the branches and the soft patter of snow on the roof. I stepped out and inhaled the biting cold Vermont air. The scent of pine, damp earth, and aged wood filled me like a hug from the past. I pushed open the cabin door. The hinges creaked a greeting from an old friend. Inside was dark, but the smell of dry pine and last year's fireplace ashes remained warm in a way the town air never could be. My husband, a quiet man with calloused hands, had built this place with his own hands in the early years of our marriage. Every foundation stone, every wooden beam he had chosen himself. He said, "This is a place we can always return to, Lauren, no matter how the world changes outside." He had been gone for 18 years, but the cabin was still here, steadfast, waiting for me. I turned on the small desk lamp. Its soft golden glow spread across the room. I lit the fireplace, taking old newspapers from the wooden box, stacking dry logs I had prepared, striking a match. The fire caught slowly, popping gently like the first breath after a long sleep. I drew the curtains aside, letting the dim light reflected from the snow enter the room. Lake Evergreen outside was frozen with a thin layer of ice glittering under the new moon. No one knew I was here. No one needed to know. I sat on the old sofa holding a steaming cup of tea I had poured from the kettle on the wood stove. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange freedom. I had chosen this place not because anyone needed me here, but because I wanted to be. No explanations, no permission, no waiting for a call asking, "Mom, will you come this year?" Only me, the fire, and the wind whispering outside the window. My phone vibrated lightly in my coat pocket. An email from Robert Hayes. I opened it and read under the flickering firelight, "Lauren, the papers are complete. The cabin by Lake Evergreen is your personal property under Vermont law. Full ownership is clearly stated in your husband's will. No provision allows for transfer without your signature. No one, not your son or daughter-in-law, has the right to demand or dispute it. You are fully secure legally. If necessary, I can send a notarized copy." I read it twice. My heart beat faster, not out of fear, but from a deep, profound relief. This cabin was not just a shelter. It was legal proof that I still had a part of this world, a part no one could take from me. I turned off my phone and set it down. No need to reply immediately. No need for explanations. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the glittering frozen lake. The snow continued to fall, covering every trace. And in that moment, I whispered to myself, a quiet, certain voice, "For the first time, I have chosen a place without needing anyone's permission. For the first time, I am coming home, to my own home." The fire in the fireplace flared higher, as if it agreed. I smiled, the first real smile in many days. Not a polite smile, not a smile hiding pain, just the smile of a 68-year-old woman finally opening the door for herself. And this winter I knew would be the first winter I would not wait any longer. I would live, truly live, in the place I belonged. In the first days at the cabin, I did not rush to do much. I simply sat by the fireplace, watching the flames, listening to the wind howl through the cracks in the door, and letting the silence gradually become familiar instead of frightening. I no longer checked my phone every hour. I no longer waited for a message or a call. I simply existed. And strangely, that existence began to bring a sense of peace I had never felt in all those years. One late autumn afternoon, before the snow had completely covered the path, I walked down to the end-of-season farmers market by the lake. The stalls were sparse, with only a few vendors selling golden apples, pies, and wild honey. I bought a bag of apples, standing there, admiring the bright red fruit in the pale sunlight, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Lauren Smith, is that really you?" I turned. Patricia Wells, my high school classmate, the one who had written me letters for all the years I moved to Vermont. Her hair was now silver, but her smile was still warm as ever. Patricia lived alone in a cabin 2 miles from mine, after suing her son to keep her house, because he had tried to sell it without asking. We embraced without many words. We bought 2 slices of apple pie and walked back to my cabin. I made hot cocoa with fresh milk and dark chocolate, pouring it into 2 old brown mugs. We sat on the wooden steps' backs, resting against the doorframe facing the pine forest dusted with snow. The cold wind blew, but the fire inside still radiated warmth far enough to reach outside. We did not talk about children. We did not ask, "How is your son?" or "Is your grandchild well?" We just sat there sipping cocoa, watching the frozen lake sparkle in the late afternoon light. After a long silence, Patricia spoke, her voice soft as the wind. "You can live alone, Lauren." But the silence still screams. Her words landed in my chest like a heavy stone. I knew exactly what she meant. Some nights when the heater was on, just an ordinary sound, it echoed like someone whispering my name in a dream. Not because it was cold, but because it was not the voice of anyone familiar. The absence of footsteps, children's laughter, the sound of doors opening, all of it created a void my ears tried to fill with imagined sounds. I did not respond immediately. I just held the cocoa cup tightly, letting the warmth seep through my hands. Patricia did not wait for an answer either. We sat for a while longer, then she stood, waved lightly. No promises to meet again, but we both understood people who have survived to this age will find each other when needed. That evening, as I was tidying the kitchen, there was a soft knock at the door. I opened it. Harlan Thompson, my 75-year-old neighbor from across the hill, stood there holding a tin of oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. He did not smile broadly, nor ask long questions. He just nodded, handed me the tin, and said in his deep, warm New England voice, "Welcome to the cold season, Lauren." He turned away before I could say much. I held the tin standing at the door for a long while, not because of the cookies, but because of that gesture. Simple, unassuming, yet enough to remind me that in these cold lands, care often comes in the quietest ways. A few days later, I drove into town, stopping at Evergreen Book Nook, the small bookstore on the corner. Emily, the owner, a middle-aged woman with round glasses and a friendly smile, recognized me immediately. She had once invited me to be a storyteller for children on Saturday mornings. Kids in pajamas sitting under the small Christmas tree holding mugs of hot cocoa. "Lauren, you are here. I have saved a spot for you," Emily said, her eyes bright. I smiled, feeling a lightness for the first time at being called by my name without the mom or grandma attached. I agreed. And from that day, every Saturday, I went to the bookstore, sat on the cushioned chair by the window, opened a book, and told stories. No princesses, no dragons. Just stories about an old woman living alone in a wooden cabin, tending her fire every evening, talking to the wind and the pine trees. The children listened wide-eyed, never asking why the old woman was alone. They only asked, "Can you tell us more?" And I told them, because this time I told stories not to be needed, but because I wanted to. Then a snowstorm came, the biggest of the winter. The wind howled like wolves. Snow fell so thick that I could not see the pine trees 10 meters from the cabin. The power went out after 2 hours. The cabin was completely isolated for 36 hours. No roads, no phone signal, no one could reach me. I did not panic. I stoked the fireplace with the reserve wood, checked the windows, shoveled snow from the porch with the old spade. My hands were numb, my back ached with age, but I kept going. I made soup from the pantry, brewed tea over the fire, and sat by the fire listening to the wind scream outside. During those 36 hours, I did not wait for anyone to save me. I did not call Ethan. I did not call Brooke. I saved myself. When the storm ended and the snow stopped falling, I opened the door. The world was blanketed in white, peaceful in a strange way. I stood there breathing in the fresh post-storm air and realized I was stronger than I had ever imagined. Not because I was young or fit, but because I had chosen to live, truly live, instead of merely waiting. The cabin was no longer a place to hide. It was a place to begin again. And this time I no longer feared the silence, because I had learned how to make it a friend, not an enemy. A few weeks after the storm, the snow fell more lightly, but the cold still bit through skin and bone, as it always did in Vermont winters. I began to get used to the rhythm of my new life, waking early to light the fire, brewing strong black coffee, sitting by the window, watching Lake Evergreen shimmer beneath its thin sheet of ice. I no longer checked my phone every hour. I no longer wondered if anyone remembered me today. I simply lived, quietly, simply, and for the first time for myself. Then one morning, when the snow fell so heavily that I had to clear the path in front of the porch, I heard the distant sound of an engine. The heavy SUV rolled slowly along the snow-covered path. I stopped shoveling and looked toward the gate. The silver-gray vehicle, tall with frost on the windows, came to a stop. The license plate was the same as in 2018, the year Ethan got his promotion, and proudly told me, "Mom, I chose this plate because it has meaning." I stood still, hands still, gripping the shovel, breath-forming clouds in front of me. The car door opened. Brooke stepped out first, wearing a white coat holding a gift box tied with a red ribbon. Ethan followed, his face stiff under a knit hat, eyes avoiding mine. Sophie, now 15, nearly as tall as her mother, wore a red hoodie holding a wreath she had made from pine branches and glitter the 2 paper snowflakes slightly crooked. She stood still, not running to me like she used to. I did not step out onto the porch. I just opened the cabin door enough to speak calmly. "Come in. There's coffee. No hugs. No, Mom has worried about you. No, why did you come here? Just a simple invitation, like inviting a stranger in during a storm." They stepped inside, carrying the chill from outside and an invisible distance larger than the falling snow. Brooke placed the gift box on the wooden table in the center of the room. Ethan looked around the cabin as if entering a place once familiar, now secured with a new lock. Sophie stood near the small tree I had made. No lights, only a few paper bows and pine cones from the backyard. I poured coffee into 3 ceramic mugs, not asking anyone if they wanted sugar or milk. I placed the mugs in front of them and then sat in the chair opposite. Brooke spoke first, her voice slightly trembling, trying to stay calm. "Mom, we know it was sudden. When you left, we thought, maybe you just needed space. But Sophie really missed you. We all did." I looked straight into her eyes. No anger, no bitterness. Just the quiet truth. No one spoke when I was there. No one asked if I wanted anything. Now I'm quiet, and that's the problem. Brooke lowered her head, hands clutching the hem of her jacket. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice rough. "Your leaving made me feel lost, Mom. Like something was missing from the house. From us." I looked at my son. The boy who once feared the dark, who clung to me every Christmas Eve when ice fell on the roof. Now he had his own home, a wife and 2 children, but he still did not understand how much space a mother needs to breathe. "I'm not angry," I said softly, my voice like a whisper through the pine trees. "I just no longer live by your instructions." No one argued. No one defended themselves. Sophie stepped forward, placing her homemade wreath on the table. The wire twisted awkwardly, a few fabric scraps, and the 2 slightly crooked paper snowflakes. She said nothing, just pressed her lips together, holding back tears the way Brooke always did when emotional. I reached out and touched the wreath gently, then stood and hung it on the old nail above the bedroom door, the same nail from Christmases past. I did not open the gift. I did not say thank you, because I had lived long enough to know not everything placed at the doorstep is love. Sometimes it is merely a belated attempt to fill the gap they created. The cabin felt heavy with silence. The fire crackled, but it could not warm the distance between us. Ethan glanced out the window where snow continued to fall relentlessly. "Mom, are you coming back?" I shook my head. No hesitation, no long explanation. Ethan whispered, "I understand. It's just, everything feels so empty." I looked at him, then at Sophie. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, eyes red. Brooke leaned forward slightly, her voice low. "I brought gingerbread. Sophie, pick the flavor you like." I nodded but did not touch the box. No need to open it. No need for fake thanks. They stood up. No one hugged me. No one cried loudly. Only the sound of snow crunching under their shoes as they stepped out the door. I did not walk them to the porch. I stayed in my chair, hands resting on the edge of the table, watching them through the frosted glass. When the SUV rolled away, Sophie turned her head. She smiled. A gentle, sad smile, the same smile I had at 11 when I still believed that everything would be fine if I tried hard enough. I did not know who that smile was for me or for herself. But in that moment, I felt a bittersweet ache she still remembered, still kept a piece of me in her heart. The car disappeared behind the pines. I closed the door and returned inside. Sophie's wreath still hung on the door, drying but intact. I sat by the fire holding my now cold coffee and whispered to myself, this is not the end of love. This is the end of proving love through silent sacrifice. The fire burned steadily. The snow fell outside. And for the first time, I did not feel alone, because I had learned that true love is not in the gifts left at the doorstep. It is the freedom to walk through that door yourself, and to decide whether or not to open it. After that unexpected visit, the cabin returned to its familiar quiet, but it was no longer the heavy silence it had once been. It felt like the calm after a storm, clear, necessary, and full of life. I did not cry much. I did not sit for hours staring out the window, waiting for the silver-gray SUV to return. I simply continued to live, day by day, slowly but surely. Every Saturday, I drove into town to Evergreen Book Nook. Emily had hung a small sign in the window, "Storyteller in Residence, Lauren Smith." No mom, no grandma, no Mrs. Ethan's mom. Just my name, Lauren Smith. The first time I saw that sign, I stood still for a moment, my hand brushing lightly over the carved letters. It was not a grand title, but it was mine, completely mine. I sat on the familiar cushioned chair by the window, the gentle winter light streaming through the frosted glass. The children gathered around wearing warm pajamas, holding mugs of hot cocoa, eyes wide with anticipation. I opened a book, not a fairy tale full of princesses and dragons, but stories I had created myself about an old woman living alone in a wooden cabin, lighting the fire each night, talking to the wind and the old pine trees. The old woman was not lonely. She was learning to listen to herself. One Saturday morning, as the story ended, a little girl of about 7, hair in 2 braids, cheeks rosy from the cold, stepped close to me. She looked straight into my eyes, her voice pure. "You tell stories like magic, Mrs. Smith." Just a simple sentence, but it reached deep into my soul. I smiled, bent down, and kissed her lightly on the forehead, then handed her a gingerbread cookie from my bag. She ran off, laughing brightly. I sat back down and opened my old notebook, the one I had carried with me since moving to the cabin. I wrote a line slowly and deliberately. Some magic appears the moment you stop trying to be someone else. I read the line again, and then closed the notebook. For the first time, I realized that magic did not lie in telling a story well or in the children enjoying it. Magic lay in daring to tell it under my own name. No roles, no duties, no silent sacrifices. Just Lauren Smith, a 68-year-old woman living her own life. I used to believe that love meant preparing everything quietly, setting up the tree before the children woke, baking cookies, even if no one asked, transferring money without receipts. I thought that if I were good enough, sacrificial enough, invisible enough, they would always need me. But now I know dignity is more important than kindness. Kindness can be forgotten, taken for granted. Dignity. Dignity is what keeps me standing when the world around me changes. That afternoon, I returned to the cabin carrying the wreath Sophie had made. I did not hang it on the bedroom door anymore, where it would only be a private memory. I hung it on the largest window where the morning sunlight shone directly where anyone walking by the lake could see it if they paid attention. The wreath was dry, a few pieces of fabric faded, the 2 paper snowflakes slightly crooked, but it was beautiful in its own way. I hung it up and stepped back to look, not to wait for Sophie to return and see it, not to remind myself of what had been lost, but to preserve the memory, a beautiful memory without binding me to my old role. It reminded me that family love can still exist, but not by sacrificing myself to maintain it. I sat on the old sofa watching the wreath glisten in the late afternoon light. The fire burned steadily, the logs popping like a peaceful heartbeat. Outside snow fell lightly, covering every trace. And in my heart, for the first time in years, I felt true relief. Not because everything had been fixed, not because my family would return as they once were, but because I had healed myself. Bit by bit, day by day, I was no longer the one waiting for an invitation. I was no longer the one bringing gifts to the doorstep to be accepted. I am Lauren Smith, the storyteller, the keeper of my cabin's fire, and most importantly, someone who has learned to love herself without anyone's permission. And if you are listening to this story, perhaps from a quiet kitchen or while driving home on a winter night, I want to ask you one thing. When will you give yourself a seat? Not a seat given by someone else, but a seat you choose, keep, and protect. Because you deserve it. Do not wait for another winter. The magic begins the moment you stop trying to be someone else. Just be yourself. And then winter passed quietly without the drama I had once imagined. Snow still fell and the wind still howled through the pine trees, but I no longer felt cold. Not because the stove burned hotter, but because my heart had found warmth from within. Saturday mornings at Evergreen Book Nook gradually became an essential part of my new life. The children still came, still sat in a circle beneath the small Christmas tree, still held their mugs of hot cocoa and listened. I told stories under the name Lauren Smith, no other titles added. And each time I finished, I saw their eyes light up as if I had given them an invisible gift. I did not need them to call me Grandma. I only needed them to listen, and I told the stories because I wanted to, not out of obligation. One afternoon when the weak winter sunlight streamed through the cabin window, I stood and walked to the largest window. Sophie's wreath still hung there, dry but resilient, the paper snowflakes slightly bent from time. I touched it lightly, feeling the fragility of memory. It was no longer a symbol of pain, but a gentle reminder. Family love still exists, but it cannot, and should not, demand that I lose myself to sustain it. I looked out over Lake Evergreen, where the ice had thickened, reflecting the pale gray sky. And then I asked myself, not anyone else but myself and you, the one listening to this story right now, when was the last time you did something just for you? Not because your children needed it, not because someone expected it, not to prove that you are still useful. Simply for you, for your heart, for your breath, for the dreams you once set aside to make room for others. I used to be like an old blanket, thick, warm wool draped over the whole family through long winters. I kept Ethan warm when he was a boy, Sophie and Liam when they were afraid of the dark brook, when she was exhausted after giving birth. I was folded and put away when no longer needed, and everyone forgot that it was I who had kept them warm through so many harsh winters. But one day that blanket learned to wash itself, dry itself in the sun, wrap itself around its own shoulders. And strangely, it was warmer than ever before. You are the same. Perhaps you once were that blanket, a mother, a grandmother, a wife, a friend, a neighbor, always ready. You gave so much quietly without asking for anything in return. But now if you are sitting there holding a cold cup of tea, looking out at the snow-covered window and wondering, do I still have anything left, then listen to me. Do not wait for another winter to realize. Hold close the hearts that have loved you quietly. Maybe your grandmother, your mother, the neighbor who brought cookies to your house during your first Christmas in a new town. Do not let them become the old blanket folded and forgotten. Call them, send a message, invite them for coffee. Let them know that you remember, that you appreciate them, that you need them. Not because they are useful, but because they are themselves. And if you are the one who feels like that old blanket, wrap yourself around yourself. Do something just for you, a walk in the snow, a book you once wanted to read, a morning sleeping in without an alarm. Give yourself a seat, not at someone else's table, but at the center of your own life. I stood by the cabin window, snow falling softly outside, covering every trace of the past. The fire in the stove burned steadily, the logs popping like a peaceful heartbeat. I looked at Sophie's wreath glistening under the warm light, and then at my own reflection in the glass. A 68-year-old woman, silver hair, wrinkles around her eyes, but eyes brighter than ever before. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a hidden smile, just a smile for myself. My story does not end here. It has only just begun. And if you are listening, if this story touches a corner of your heart, let it be the beginning of yours. Because you deserve it. You always deserve it. Thank you for staying with me this far. I wish you a warm winter, not from a fire someone else built, but from the fire you kindle in your own heart. And if one day you pass through Evergreen Hollow, stop by the cabin by the lake. The door is always open. There is hot coffee, oatmeal cookies, and a woman ready to listen. Not to fix anything, but simply to sit with you by the fire and remind you you are never alone. Peace be with you.